Hello folks and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the fuel tank for the little Yamaha YL1. Sharp-eyed viewers will note that this is a different color. This is the original tank that came with the bike. The bike was originally blue. However, I prefer the red, I think it's called Vermilion, Yamaha Vermilion, which is that maroonish red color, which is a correct color for that model year. And it's my preference versus the blue, so I'm changing the color. Yamaha, to my knowledge, did not keep track of color by serial number, so no one could prove me wrong. Anyway, what we're going to talk about is preparing this tank for rechroming and painting. So as you can see, it was originally partially chrome, in fact significantly chrome. To my knowledge, that is some of the original markings that were put on the tank when it was made. These tanks were originally chromed, completely chromed, and then they came back and then painted the detail like this stripe down the middle and then on the bottom of the tank, as you see here. So it has to be chromed first and then painted. To prepare it for that process, I have a couple of dents here. I've got, I think you can see it right here, a pretty large dent right there, and I have a couple of smaller ones further down right here, right here. That's the only damaged dents, anyway, that I can find on this tank. You can see residue of hot melt adhesive right here. I did attempt to use the suction cup method, that is where you attach suction cups with hot melt and then you try to pull the dents out. That might have pulled a little bit of some of these dents out, but it fundamentally didn't do what I wanted it to do, especially on this one, which is quite large. So I have to move to plan B, as I want to appreciably have as much of the body work done, that is the dent removal, completed before I send it off for chrome. I'm going to try to avoid doing a whole bunch of body work with a fully chromed tank. It's going to be bad enough I'm going to have to paint it, let alone have to do significant body work. I think you can see right where my thumb is right there is a little dent. The one right there. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today, not so much the tank itself, but the process I'm going to use to remove the dents. And this is something new for me. I have never used this technique before. And we're going to talk a little bit about the process I'm going to use to remove the dents rather than the tank itself. I just want to introduce this to you so you knew a little background, a little context of what we're going to talk about next. So I've been doing some research on how to remove dents, alternative methods to remove dents, and I've decided I'm going to use a small slide hammer, and that's what you see here. This is a brand new tool. I bought this off of eBay for, I think it was $8 or $9 US. A lightweight slide or hammer. I have a much heavier duty version of this, by the way, that it's much, much larger, that's used for pulling wheel bearings out of axles and cars and that kind of thing. It's way too large for this relatively delicate operation. So I bought this inexpensively. This is designed to use a screw. It came with three. It came with 3 of these screws. The idea is you drill a hole in the body panel of, for instance, a car fender. Then you screw this fastener in. Then you attach the slide hammer and pull it out. That's the whole idea. I'm not real keen on drilling holes in my fuel tank, though I could and then weld them up, but I've decided to take a different approach. I decided to use a hybrid approach, that is, use my welder to weld studs on the fuel tank where the dents are, and you can buy commercially made stud welders. I'm aware of that. They're relatively pricey. I don't do enough body work to justify going out and spending $100 US dollars or more on a stud welder, so I'm going to make my own version of it. And I'm going to take this inexpensive vice grip type gripping pliers. I bought this at Harbor Freight. And for those of you that are not familiar with Harbor Freight that might not reside in North America, it's a large discount tool chain that sells inexpensive tools. and I think I paid $6, $7, $8 US for this inexpensive pair of gripping pliers. The idea is you weld a stud to the dent, then you grip it with the welding pliers like this, and then you pull and pop the dent out. What most folks I've seen do is they'll pull this adjusting bolt out and they'll make an adapter to go from this threaded spot here where this bolt spins out to adapt a sliding hammer to slide in, and there'll be because the threads are a different pitch and diameter, they'll make a little adapter. My concern with that is if you pull this way, you aren't pulling in line with the jaws. So I'm going to take a different approach here, and you can see I struck a line, that's that red line right there. That's in line with the jaws. And I made a little adapter, or rather I'm making a little adapter that will fit like that. I think you can see that. This adapter will be welded to the top of the vice grips, or the gripping pliers, and then the sliding hammer will thread into this end like this. You can see it's already been drilled and tapped. So my plan is, let me just put this together for you quickly. My plan is when this is together, this will be welded in place, something like that. I'll weld it here. Then I can use the sliding hammer on studs that have been welded to the fuel tank, a lot like a stud welder. I'm not going to use a stud welder, I'll just hold them with a pair of needle nose, the studs, and tack them with my MIG welder. So that's my basic idea. I'll need to grind this plating off here around on both sides so I can get a good weld when I go to weld it. So the way I made it is I took this 3/4 inch hexagon shaped rod, cut it to length, I think it's around 3 3/8 inches, nothing magical about that. Laid it up on the vice grips and struck a line so I knew the approximate angle here. You can't see it anymore because I milled it off. Fixtured it in my mill, took a 1/2 inch mill, that's a 1/2 inch width there. I measured this to get an idea of how wide I needed to be. 1/2 inch seemed to be about right, 3/8 seemed too small. I don't have a 7/16 mill, end mill, so I wasn't going to go out and buy one. So I used the 1/2 inch, it'll work. I then positioned it in the vise on the mill and ran the cutter back and forth like this. If I can get that for you there, and cut that slot on my mill. It took maybe 10 minutes. And as you can see there, it fits pretty nicely. Next step then will be to grind the plating off. This has been, I think, zinc plated. I'm going to grind the plating off around like this on both sides so that when I weld it, I'm welding directly to fresh steel and not to the plating. And I will weld this in place, I'll tack it, and then I'll stitch it together. And when I'm done, it should look something like that. Then it will become a matter of obtaining some studs or nails. I could probably use nails as well. And welding those to the dents in the fuel tank and pulling the dents out. That's the plan. Got a ways to go, of course, before we get there. What I'm going to do now is remove the plating from this gripping pliers, vice grips like pliers, to prepare it for welding. And I'll show some of that for you. I'm not sure I'm going to show you every step, but I'll show you as I work along the process how it's going. First thing I'm going to do is just mark the pliers approximately where I need to grind back for the welding process. Just duplicate that on both sides. Come down something like that. Probably a little bit too much here. Something like that. So I'll take a grinder here and remove the plating in this section here in preparation for the welding. Got the vice grips set up in the vise, the bench vise, and you can see I got it hanging out over the end so I can get at it with the grinding wheel. And what I'm going to use is just a 90-degree air grinder like you see here. Installed is a 120 grit abrasive pad. I buy these abrasive pads in bulk. I have all different grits. You can buy these in different diameters. I did not have a smaller diameter than this. Is the original right here, and so I cut this down with a scissors so it's a little bit smaller in diameter so I can get in here a little easier. I just didn't happen to have the right grit in this particular size that I wanted to use. When I do grinding, I typically start with finer grits and work to coarser if I need to. I think, grits all the way down to 36 in this larger size, but that might be a little bit too coarse. So I'm going to start with this 120. If it's not coarse enough, I'll keep working my way finer. Probably do an 80 grit, 60 grit, 36 grit if necessary. I don't think I'm going to have to do that, but I'm going to start with this 120. So I'll reposition the camera so you can see the process, at least some of the process. I don't think I'll record the whole thing. Let me show you the gist of what I'm going to do as I remove this plating. By the way, when you do this kind of grinding, always wear eye protection. I see guys on YouTube grinding and sparks flying, and they have not even street glasses on. Their face 18 inches to 24 inches from the work, and I just grit my teeth when I see that, no pun intended. Not only do I wear safety glasses, but I have a face shield I have on at this point also. I have had scratched eyeballs before, twice, and it is no fun at all. It's absolute misery until they heal. So I take no chances, and I encourage all of you to take your time and be safe. So we'll go ahead and get started here. there's the semi-finished tool with the slide hammer attached. Still just a little bit warm from the welding. But you can see I just tacked it in place. Some welds. I restruck this red line that is intended to give a visual indicator of the jaws, the pull of the jaws, so that was easily visible for this video. But again, the idea is now that when I use the slide hammer, I will be pulling in line with the jaws rather than off in an angle this way, which is what would happen if I was attached the slide hammer to this threaded section right here. This angle is what's going to kick it off. I consider this pretty much done now, so what I'll do as a final step is I will clean this up really well, wire brush it, and I will mask off here on the tool itself like this, where I ground the plating off, clean off that red line. Then I'll hit it with some paint to preserve it, and I'll also paint the adapter, this hexagon piece of steel here, because that's just raw steel right now. So I'll paint both of those with probably a silver paint. It's just more of a preservative than anything else. And when that's all done, I'll show you the final tool. Well, there's a finished tool. It's now several hours later. You can see I've applied a coat of silver rattle can paint. See a little bleed through right there where I didn't have the masking tape quite down all the way. But it's appreciably complete now for my use. Keep in mind the way this is used is you would weld a stud. Imagine if you welded this with a stud. This just happens to be a nail I'm using for demonstration purposes. And I might even actually use nails for the project. But you can buy studs for this, but we'll see. Anyway, you would typically weld this to or a series of studs to the dent, and then you would attach this tool like that. And so of course it would be more in a vertical position, and then you use the slide hammer to pull the dent out. That's the theory or the concept. So it came out about as well as I could have expected, I would say, for a handmade, homemade tool. It didn't take actually very long. Probably took me as long to paint it and let that dry as it did anything else. But we got that done, so the next step will be to use this in a future video to see if we can't pull some of those dents out. Stay tuned here for a moment, and I am going to show you the tank as I have ground off some of the paint so we can get a better look at the dents that we'll be removing or attempting to remove with this very tool. This is the major dent right here, and there's actually a series of them. There's one here, there's one here, and there's one here. So there's actually at least 3 separate dents. And this is probably the deepest set of dents right here. There's some smaller dents down in here. This one is fairly deep. Again, it's a series of small dents. This one, and this one aren't quite as deep. In fact, I probably won't even try to pull these out. I think I'll end up using body filler on these because they're shallow enough. You shouldn't use body filler on anything more than 1/8 of an inch deep, and or even thinner than that, preferably. And this dent up here is pretty deep. I think you can get a good shot of that. This one is fairly deep. These others, maybe this one too, this one and this one, I think I can use body filler on. So that's going to be the project here using this tool in the future. You can see here where I need to grind back the paint. You can see the copper showing through because there is chrome underneath this paint. And you can just see where I went through the chrome, which is very, very thin. And you can start to see the copper show through. Anyway, that's why I made the tool, to pull those dents in this tank before I send it off to have it re-chromed. When it comes back from the chroming, then I'll have to mask it, do some filler, some sanding, before I go ahead and paint it, which would be quite a bit later on, I think. Probably at least this summer. It takes about 10 to 12 weeks to get a turnaround on chrome locally, so it'll be a while. Even if I send this off today, it'll be pushing 3 months before I get it back. So that's it for this video, folks. That is building or making this little specialty tool for using a small slide hammer to remove dents. I hope you found it useful. If not, at least entertaining. And as usual, thanks for watching.